In one of your talks, you had mentioned that Lorentz and Poincaré, they were trying to make sense of the infinite energy of the electron, the self energy. And so they said, okay, maybe the electron has some extent, but then they need to study the structure of the electron. And then Einstein came about and said, just forget about all of that and just
Right.
start to study and stipulate the Lorentz symmetry, and we'll concern ourselves with the structure of the electron later. And that turned out to be the correct move, and that some
Exactly.
problems shouldn't be solved right now. So do you think the nature of space of my question of what does space-time emerge from, if it emerges, is a question that shouldn't be tackled right now?
Um, I only know one way I wouldn't say that, because we do know actually one insight that kind of is along that direction, which goes by the name of holographic duality or gauge gravity duality, ADS-CFT. So we've learned it actually emerged from string theory, although the idea doesn't really require string theory to be part of the story, that there's a pretty concrete framework in terms of which we account for physics in space and time by using a space-time of one less dimension with no gravity. And that's the ADS-CFT duality. And in that context, space-time in the bulk emerges in a kind of fuzzy way from a sharp space-time on the boundary. So that's a pretty significant, I think, insight and step forward in our path towards understanding quantum gravity. It's a kind of strange step that bothers me, because in that framework, one has reduced everything to what's called a conformal field theory on a fixed conformal geometry with no gravity.
Uh-huh.
And gravity is just an effective thing that emerges from higher level description of phenomena of that. But then you have to ask, okay, well, wait a minute, where did this conformal geometry on which this lower dimensional theory lives come from? And why is it just sitting there rigid? It's like, we made a big step in going from Newtonian gravity and non-relativistic physics to general relativity, when Einstein realized that the inertial structure of space-time is not fixed, once and for all laid down by God or whatever, but it's part of the dynamics of everything that's going on. But in ADS-CFT duality, the conformal geometry on which this conformal field theory lives is just fixed at the beginning. So I think probably most people have the idea that feature of this duality is probably not fundamental. Like, if the duality is leading us to something that's truly fundamental about the nature of space-time and gravity, that picture is just a stepping stone towards it, because it still relies on a sharply defined, rigid, conformal geometry.
Two quick questions about this. So some people say that you could start with the bulk and recover the CFT, and you can go from the CFT to the bulk. So they're dual to one another. If that's the case, why would we say that gravity emerges from CFT, not the other way around? If they're dual, it doesn't sound like you can privilege one over the other.
Right. I think they're not really dual. I think the relationship is not really symmetrical in the sense of a duality of two completely equivalent things. One side of this duality is very sharply defined, and in fact completely understood from the viewpoint of contemporary mathematical physics and quantum field theory. The other side is kind of fuzzy, and its full nature is not understood. Um, and the concepts we use to describe it are approximate. So in that sense, I think it's not a symmetrical duality. Um, I mean, to be more concrete, like, what is it that's dual to the CFT? Is it just certain quantum fields and gravity? No, we have to include strings. Okay, is it just strings, quantum fields, and gravity? No, we actually have to include D-branes. Okay, so is it just D-branes, strings, and quantum fields? Well, then which D-branes and in which topology and which, it just complete. There's a kind of, I think the answer to all those is, well, it depends on the state of the conformal field theory. There isn't like a single bulk description, and there isn't a sharp bulk description. That's my interpretation of it.
So it's not CFT ADS duality. It's CFT ADS plus strings plus D brains plus so and so plus ... unknown duality.
That's good, in my opinion.
Then my other question was going to be, if you want the dynamics on the CFT to not be fixed in terms of the space-time, then wouldn't that just be saying CFT plus gravity is dual to something that's gravity? Like, why would you want that? Isn't the whole point to recover gravity?
Yeah, for sure. Well, gravity and other things, space. Yeah, no, I'm not saying we should add gravity into it. I'm just saying maybe there's too much in it to begin with.
Uh-huh.
It has too much rigidity to it, it seems to me, to be like absolutely fundamental. It also has complete arbitrariness. Like, which quantum field theory do we plunk on this conformal geometry? Well, in the case of one of the cases, it's four-dimensional super Yang-Mills theory with a group SUN and certain field representations, right? I mean, it's a particular quantum field theory. So I think I'll just say again that it's a stepping stone, but it can't be anything like a fundamental description.
Brian Greene suggested that space-time is fundamentally woven with wormholes that connect entangled quantum degrees of freedom. Have you heard of this? It's an extension of ER equals EPR.
Right. Yeah, I have heard of it.
So what do you make of it?
So ER equals EPR, that's Einstein-Rosen equals Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen. Einstein-Rosen refers to the maximal extension of the Schwarzschild solution, black hole solution of general relativity. It's a kind of weird space-time that has, as you go in towards the black hole, you go through a throat and come out the other side, and there's a whole nother side of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And the throat that connects the two sides is called the Einstein-Rosen bridge. And what, in the context of ADS-CFT, what is the dual conformal field theory to this kind of a configuration? The answer was, it's actually two CFTs. So we actually have a CFT that's kind of associated with the asymptotic region on one side of spacetime and one on the other side.
Right.
But then, in what sense are they connected to each other? You could imagine they're completely independent quantum field theories that have nothing to do with each other. Then they couldn't be dual to a single spacetime which is connected one side to the other. And the answer is that in the context of ADS-CFT, if the quantum state of the two conformal field theories is correlated in an entangled way, so it's basically some giant Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen pair of CFTs that are extremely entangled with each other, then the space-time that's dual to that has this Einstein-Rosen bridge connecting the two sides. That's where the idea of ER equals EPR came from initially, I think. Now you could say, okay, but is it only a property of that very special situation, or can we generalize it? And Susskind and Maldacena, I think, coined the ER equals EPR term to suggest that this connection is not just a property of that one very special situation, but it's actually a very general thing. And in fact, this kind of entanglement applies even in a single ADS space.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, can I explain this? Yeah, it gets pretty technical to explain this, but let me try to boil down to the essential thing. Remember we talked earlier about the entanglement of the vacuum of quantum fields when we chop space in half by an imaginary division, right? But every place you chop space has this huge amount of entanglement between the two halves in the vacuum state. And you might say, well, what's special about the vacuum? Well, nothing is special. If I add a bunch of particles, let's say I add everything in this room, the state is still very close to the vacuum state. And at very short scales, I still have the same entanglement that I would have had in the actual vacuum state.
Wait, why is it if you added everything in the room that the state is close to the vacuum?
because everything in the room is operating on a scale of order centimeters and meters and millimeters, or even of atoms on a scale of angstroms. But the lion's share of the entanglement is happening at much smaller scales.
Understood. Okay.
Like way down to the Planck scale, which is where it's cut off somehow. So essentially all this enormous amount of entanglement that exists no matter what state we're in when we divide space in half. So the idea is that that's what it even means to have two sides of a boundary of space. Suppose I did the following thought experiment. I take the vacuum of space, I put my imaginary boundary, which has a huge amount of entanglement on the two sides, okay? And then I remove all of that entanglement by modifying the state on this side and modifying the state on this side and disentangling it until I've got it completely separated so that the state here is totally uncorrelated to the state here. What would happen then? Would I still have a space that's connected between there?
Uh-huh.
Actually, I would have an infinite negative energy density. I would have a state whose gravitational back reaction is so big that it probably sort of cleaves space into two halves. The idea is to take this maximally extended black hole spacetime that I started talking about, with the two CFTs being entangled and that being dual to the Einstein-Rosen bridge, and realize that relationship between entanglement and connectivity of space is actually a general one. The fact that space in this room is connected from this side of my imaginary boundary to this side has something to do with the fact that empty space is full of entangled vacuum fluctuations. Another side of this story has to do with the metric. So far I've been only talking about the quantum field fluctuations, right? But I think I mentioned earlier that there are two things that fill empty space, always: the metric and the vacuum of the quantum fields.
Uh-huh.
I suspect that this is a passing stage in the history of physics, that we treat those two things separately, that there isn't really a separate metric degree of freedom. In fact, if you just show me the vacuum fluctuations, I can measure the metric in the behavior of the vacuum fluctuations. The metric is encoded in the nature of the correlations of the vacuum fluctuations. So the metric is kind of superfluous and redundant in the description if I just knew the vacuum fluctuations. Now, or the vacuum state. That gives rise to the idea that maybe we should try to rewrite quantum field theory and get rid of the metric and just express anywhere that when you write your quantum field theory down where you need a metric, just put in the metric that you extract from the quantum field state itself. And that way get a self-consistent scheme where the metric is strictly emergent from the quantum fields. That's also something I've thought about and even worked on a little bit. But I suspect in the future we'll find that the metric needs to go as a fundamental ingredient in the recipe.
This was just a teaser. The full podcast is in the description. As you know, on Theories of Everything, we delve into some of the most reality-spiraling concepts, from theoretical physics and consciousness to AI and emerging technologies. To stay informed in an ever-evolving landscape, I see The Economist as a wellspring of insightful analysis and in-depth reporting on the various topics we explore here and beyond. The Economist's commitment to rigorous journalism means you get a clear picture of the world's most significant developments, whether it's in scientific innovation or the shifting tectonic plates of global politics. The Economist provides comprehensive coverage that goes beyond the headlines. What sets The Economist apart is their ability to make complex issues accessible and engaging, much like we strive to do in this podcast. If you're passionate about expanding your knowledge and gaining a deeper understanding of the forces that shape our world, then I highly recommend subscribing to The Economist. It's an investment into intellectual growth, one that you won't regret. As a listener of TOE, you get a special 20% off discount. Now you can enjoy The Economist and all it has to offer for less. Head over to their website, www.economist.com/TOE, TOE, to get started. Thanks for tuning in, and now back to our explorations of the mysteries of the universe.